Okay, hello everyone. Today is April 25th, 2022. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF certified meeting, so please be nice to each other. And yeah, let's have a good meeting today. So if you've been following these recordings, the past two meetings, we've basically been working mainly on the Admin Network Policy API, and we will continue to do so today. Unfortunately, between this meeting and the last one, we haven't had much more additional reviews. We had some good follow-up comments and stuff added in the last meeting, but there's just a few things I think we can go over here today. The first of which being the work to break out a new object in this type, or a new object in this API for baseline rules, which I drafted a commit for here. Basically, the only questions I had were, does it make sense to have, I copied what Gateway API did basically, and I created a new file called shared types that basically holds most of the actual types that are used by both a baseline admin network policy and an admin network policy. Is that the right way to do things, or should I be more explicit in that I redefine types totally, or is there any opinions on that? It's actually funny here. See, it rendered as a rename, even though it's not.
So essentially, you're saying for both CRD types, for the structs that are shared by both CRD types is in this Go file, and
yeah,
you have two separate other Go files for each CRD, basically.
Right.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really need two separate files. Most API groups only have a single types.go.
Okay.
But whatever works.
Cool. I can do that as well. I didn't know. That's what I thought Gateway did. But I will.
Yeah, actually, I think that is what Gateway does. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that in Gateway actually is easier to find things as well because they split it. So I think it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then I'll tidy this up. There isn't, nothing really changed from what we had discussed in the previous meeting. We just basically removed any references to priority equals 0. And there's like one extra note in here that
did we consider Singleton though? Like I remember
right.
this being a discussion.
Yeah, that was my next question. Singleton, in the sense that like we should have, I think we agreed that we can have multiple baseline admin network policies because that's all right. But yeah, I guess that's not Singleton, but I'm not sure. Like, what do we think? Do we have one baseline admin network policy for the entire cluster? And if that is the case, do you just define the name as restricted to one name? I don't really know how Singletons look in the actual API.
If we want a Singleton, that's how we would do it. Yeah. I don't remember exactly why we were arguing for or against Singleton in detail.
So I think the argument was brought up by Rahul, who is not here today, but I think I do remember his argument being because we have a single priority, right? So if we allow people to create a bunch of baseline policies, maybe we're basically just allowing them to step down on their own toes because it is a single priority thing. And if you define conflicting rules, that might end up not looking good. Whereas if we just do a Singleton, everything will be listed in a single file. So because we have the rule ordering thing, right? So
yeah, and I remember I think we talked about we can make it Singleton now, and then if we decide later that that's a bad idea, we just relax that restriction and we can do that. Whereas the other way, it would be harder to change.
Right. And the other thing is about use cases, because I think last time we discussed it, we only think there might be one specific use case for the baseline rule, which is, for every namespace that's not kube system, basically, I wanted to start it out denying everything, stuff like that. So it really doesn't strike me as, we have more use cases than just deploying one single baseline policy. Although this has been, a discussion also for the admin level policy, because we're saying, hey, this is the only use case we can think of. But people will come up and say, what if in the future there are other use cases? We need to be future proof, right? So it is another, decision to make, I guess. But to be honest, I'm fine either way. If we do wanted to go with the singleton, then probably we wanted to, choose some good names for it, I guess. I actually don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it can be as simple. It could just be, I don't know.
Default.
Yeah. Default baseline admin network policy. That's a mouthful. Or just default. Yeah, that's fine. And then to do that in the API, I guess I just literally validate that it can only be default. It's as simple as that, right? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah,
I will do that.
I guess this is also a good topic to bring up to Tim as well in the discussion to understand what he thinks about this guy.
Cool. Yeah, no, I agree. I plan on basically bringing up everything that's still left to Tim. There's only a few things actually, really. So I think that's all I had on the baseline admin network policy. It wasn't super complicated. This will be a big jolt, I think, to everyone following this PR, like if they haven't been following really closely. So I'll probably try to put a comment in there or something just saying like, this is what happened and here we are. I already kind of did on the engineer from Calico's comment, but I'll try to make it a little more straightforward as to what's going on there. Cool. Okay. Next thing was refactoring AMP ports. I think we should just table that until talk with Tim, because he was the one who kind of pushed us away from the what we thought was more understandable sort of thing. So I don't think it makes sense to keep talking about that here at the current time. The next thing was looking at the refactoring of the lovely self, not self, etc. And Dan had a good kind of additional way to do this without Boolean, so that we don't have a you cannot set this bool to false setup, because that obviously is kind of confusing. But it still doesn't really talk about redesigning, how we're setting up namespace set anyways. So like we designed all these selector structs to be quote unquote extensible and quote unquote fail close, but we kind of disproved the ability to fail close or to define what fail closed is within the API. So I think we need to take a step back and look at the design of these structs and ask ourselves, like, is there a better way to do this? And I, for one, am not super sure yet. I'd like to think about it a bit more, but I didn't know if anyone else had any opinions.
Well, so I think one of my first comments in my old review was, oh, this would be so much cleaner if we did blah, blah, blah instead. And somebody responded, well, we can't do that because we need to fail closed. And so, if we are changing the theory on that, then, yeah, we do. I think, sorry, I forgot where I was going.
No, I got you. That makes sense. Let me see. Yeah, I think I know what comment you're talking about.
I think it was on subject. So even further back than this.
Yeah, subject. Oh, it might even be, it's probably even out of the diff, unfortunately.
Oh, wait, it was my first comment, but it might not have been like, the earliest line in the file that I commented on or something.
Right.
It commented out of order.
I will find it. I think that's it's needs to be done though. Yeah, here it is.
Yeah, I think this one, yeah. Like, I think we can make it a lot cleaner and like easier to write if we don't have to worry about, well, what happens when we add a new field?
Right. Yeah, then we don't have to have that nested extra level of nested fields. You could just use a namespace selector and pod selector flat out. Again, that's obviously reverting a bunch of forward, quote unquote, forward progress I think we made at some point to get this cat merged. But I mean, the logic behind it is there. I'm just trying to think of the best way to do it in the sense that, we do it while also bringing in kind of your rationale here into that change. Obviously, I can't really document it in the API itself. So I'll either have to put a comment just pointing to this, or maybe even write a Medium blog adapted from your comment, because you wrote enough to put in a blog. So something along those lines. Not 100% sure how I'll do that yet, but definitely.
I was gonna make a joke, or maybe expecting this to become a Netflix series.
I think it should be at this point.
Yeah.
Kind of like a dramatic saga, right? I have a blog started, but I obviously haven't been able to finish it because we haven't merged this kept. And the title is, I think it's in line with the, 100 something commits, or 2 years, 100 something commits, and 800 comments later, here we are. And now at this point it's even more than that. So yeah, it's been a saga. But yeah, I guess really we can't solve this on this call specifically. I will take a look at kind of refactoring the admin network policy peer along with the admin network policy subject, because clearly those had a lot of overlap. And if we can remove that extra level of indirection to allow for quote unquote extensibility, I think it would be a lot more straightforward. Do you agree, Yang, in terms of like refactoring those bits?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just trying to think on Dan's proposal there, because essentially he's saying there are only two cases. One is namespace and the other is pod, right? So for namespaces, the only thing that can be provided there is namespace selector. Whereas for pods, you can do combinations, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense. But for pods, you can also just do pod selector. Oh no. Right, yes, I got you what you're saying. So essentially, if we don't worry about the fail close thing, this definitely is the more readable API design. I would definitely agree, but I'm just not sure how the fading open, fading close discussion will. I'm just worried that we'll just tear that discussion, bring this discussion up again.
Right, and that's what I was trying to contemplate, how to make the change while also, pushing some of that rationale we've come up with, in the sense that it's fully.
I think the key part of the rationale is that there's nothing sane that you can do with a network policy or with an admin network policy that you don't recognize all of, because of the possibility of combined allow and deny rules means that the safe choice could be anything. So
Don't do it, and validate to the user that you can't do it, right? Yeah, that's always been the correct solution. The problem was it was hard to do and it was hard to enforce. Now, basically, even with all the the rationale you've laid out, Dan, it does fall on the job of the admin / CNI provider, users a little bit, and I don't think that's wrong at all. But it's going to need to be documented in a way that wasn't there with network policy, right? So I'm not against it. I don't think I've been against it from the beginning, but here we are. Now, do we need to, yeah. And I guess at the end of the day, it is this, that, talking about going from unstructured to the actual resource, that's validation, but not even using a webhook or anything. That's just built in to the API or to the.
Well, it would be built into the implementations. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. If the implementation also provides a webhook, then they would want to do that in the webhook as well. But yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay.
Sorry, I haven't actually read this, but I'm actually just reading the second point here about the unstructured type. Do we know that for I might be horribly wrong. Do we know for the current CNIs, for example, if we read, let's say, networking v1 network policy, do implementation actually do that, or from my understanding, implementation just grab a network policy object and assume it's valid one because it has been accepted by the API, right? So I from what I remember, I only see this unstructured thing if we're actually implementing a webhook for the resource, in which we don't do for now.
Normally, you wouldn't use unstructured for something like this, where the type at compile time.
Right.
But the idea was just that by using unstructured, we can get access to the raw value before it gets parsed, which you wouldn't be able to do if you're just using the typed clients that put it into the Go objects for you.
Right, I see. So is the idea here that maybe to get around this problem, we advise implementations to look at the admin network policies object using unstructured and see if, okay, I got you.
Like, I think you can just do a round trip, like unstructured to what your idea of admin network policy object is, and then back to unstructured. And if there are any extra fields that your version of admin network policy doesn't have, they'll get lost in that round trip.
I see.
Right. And that little bit of code, even, I feel like, is something we could write upstream, or at least like a reference, like, this is what we think you should do, right?
I think theoretically that's something that maybe we could add to the dynamic network or the dynamic listener or client code, because there are potentially other APIs where people might want to be able to do that.
Right. I wonder why we didn't follow that schema currently. I guess it's a little more inefficient because you're parsing, well, either you're parsing it on before or after you send it over the wire. I don't know.
I think it's just in the beginning, we didn't really think about this problem of, what happens when if the API server and the client are using different versions of the object.
Yeah. Okay.
I apologize for joining late and missing some of the setup discussion. What exactly problem are we trying to solve? I guess, like, I understood that there's a version queue, but is there like a particular field that this is in reference to?
So it started with a comment from you, actually. This is kind of an old comment around the admin network policy subject, and how Dan proposed, how can we make this easier to read? And our feedback was, we can't, because we want it to be extensible. However, now we've flowed into basically arguing that extensibility, i.e. failing closed, quote unquote, isn't something the API can enforce or specify. We can't specify what failing closed is because we have allow and deny rules. So now that, that's quote unquote no longer a constraint, we're looking at redesigning some of those ugly nested types we have, and talking about how we can do that without, folks coming back to this and saying, wait, what happened? We reverted a month later.
Basically, if we can't design the API in a way that implementations can safely use objects that they don't recognize, then we want to have some way of the implementations always being able to tell when they're getting an object that has fields that they don't know about. And so that's what I was talking about in point 2.
Got it. Just because it's salient, did anyone have a chance to see the discussion that I linked in the Slack? I linked a link to a Kubernetes API reviewers.
Yes,
discussion.
I skimmed through it, but I was really hoping you can, give us a high-level idea on how you think it's semi-relevant to our discussion.
So it's addressing sort of the same problem, which is that you have this struct, this top-level struct that has a bunch of basically modes it can operate in. So in this case, it would be our subject selector, and it has a bunch of modes it can operate in. It can select namespaces, or it might be selecting pods, or in the future we might have a third selector or a fourth selector. And the idea is, how do we write these sort of structs, right? These structs that are essentially a one-of. And so they're discussing, do we want to have a bunch of sub-selectors, the kind of the way we did, which is we have a namespace selector, a pod selector, and then we add new ones. Do we want to add a type field at the top of the struct, which says, this is the type namespace, and then you go read the namespace fields. This is the type pod selector, and then you go read the namespace and the pods, like so on and so forth. So it's basically dealing with the same, I think, problem that we are approaching here, which is how do we handle these potentially extensible list of sub selectors or subfields. Their recommendation seems to be to use the format that we have today, which is each logical thing, essentially, like each logical selector in our case gets its own struct, and then they all just operate independent of one another. There's no shared fields between them. I might be doing a poor job of explaining that, but did that make sense to anyone?
That makes perfect sense. I think since Tim is in the thread, I would imagine this is also what he suggested, because I think when we get on the meeting with him, he suggested the same thing. But we're just having a really hard time, naming these structs. So that's why we came up with namespace and pod selector, and then namespace selector, pod selector underneath.
Right. It's just ugly. I mean, it's just,
yeah, I know.
Day, like, let me go look at it. It's a little clunky. Like, something along the lines of what Dan was talking about, like, reads a lot better. So something like this, or even like removing that extra level, right? Like, why should we have to say subject? Well, I guess you still always have to say subject with a certain types of subject, the extra level of nesting here. Or maybe it is just a naming problem and I'm wrong. Let's go look at what it looks like today.
I mean, I don't think that their guidance is by any means finalized. I just think it's very interesting that they're having the same discussions that we are, more or less. They may not have considered the fact that naming is really hard, and it's when you try to specify this, it gets a little bit tricky.
It's not even.
That being said, personally.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say I'm sympathetic to the argument that while the extra layer, like the extra level that you have to add in the YAML is annoying, it's preferred to the ambiguity that comes about when you can reuse fields with sort of not arbitrary rules, but rules that you have to mentally compose in your head. Like if the namespace field is reusable a bunch of times, and like this other label selector is reusable only some of the times, I have to understand what gets parsed when, which is a little bit more confusing than just having everything packaged nicely for me.
So my original comment, I'd had two suggestions. One was mostly just shortening names to try and make it look nicer. And then the second one was, well, why do we even need two copies of namespace selector? Why can't we just have one? So yeah, so the one that I actually wrote out the details of here, that does still preserve a separate object for each kind of thing with no reused fields thing.
Right. But the problem is, I was just trying to say this because the problem is, let's say we have a specific example we had in mind when we designed this, right? What if in the future that we add a service account selector, for example, right?
No. I'm saying now,
okay.
keep namespace selector separately in each of the two different things. So if we add service selector in the future, then there would be subject : services : whatever you need to do a service selector.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say that if we do have a service account selector to be coupled with namespace selector, it is essentially also selecting pods, if you think about it, right? So if you do subject pods, blah, 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 then when we introduce that combination, it's really hard for us to name that struct if we have named this guy pods, right? So that's the problem.
Wouldn't that just be called service accounts?
Maybe.
I mean, like by that logic, everything's just selecting pods, right? I mean, that's the whole point. We're just giving you nice groupings on how to select pods. So I mean, you're really specifying a service account. That's what the subject's in.
That makes sense. Yes. But if that's the case, then maybe what Dan has suggested here is actually the way to go in terms of shortening these struct names. I will be totally fine with that.
And then we get a little bit of both. I mean, I think the only thing Rahul was actually disproving here was like the last sentence is why can't we just have the one level of nesting?
Right. And I think that is a reasonable argument.
Okay. Cool. That works for me. I'll look at least changing the subject field. And then it also kind of applies to
The peers.
The peers. Now the peers basically, where's like a good way to look at this? Namespace and pod set. I even get confused after I don't look at it for a while. We basically do the same thing in peers. So I'll try to shorten that as well to make it more readable, I guess. Now, the only other thing with the peer was refactoring these Booleans, which I think before you hopped on, Raul, we had touched on the possibility of just making these constants instead of Booleans to signal self or not self. I don't think there's been other argument around that, so shouldn't be too hard to fix. But as long as we're maintaining the same nesting, the changes are definitely pretty small. Are there any other points here that folks would like to bring up? Cool. So that's pretty much what I had. The last bit, I guess, which is still open, and we've gotten one comment on from Dan, basically, is the north-south traffic selector issue. That's a separate issue I made. Now I can't find it. Where'd I put it? I can find it. Wrong. Sorry. Is issue 28, which is essentially just trying to reopen the network policy, the north-south debate. I think Dan already had a good point here. Basically, one of our rationale for reopening the debate was that CNIs may not be able to, or CNIs already are distinguishing between east-west and north-south traffic. Specifically, i.e. like technically an empty namespace selector selects only east-west traffic and no north-south traffic. I would say that that's not implemented correctly by at least Oven Kubernetes. I know that for a fact. I think most CNIs today see an empty namespace selector and they apply it to all traffic. I could be wrong. Does anyone else know otherwise?
I feel like OVN Kubernetes does get that right. I mean, it would have to explicitly special case it to get it wrong.
Well, I have to go look now because I'm pretty sure like if you so if you block or just say like egress to empty namespace selector, it's blocking traffic to everything. It's like you can't go to Google. You can't go to 8.8.8.8.
Is this because the DNS service is blocked, or it is actually the north-south traffic?
I want
Because
to say that it's actually the north-south traffic, or like it's actually everything. It's not just east-west. I will go check because it's a single ACL that's doing that. But I'm pretty sure generally in how it's used today, like when folks want to block everything to a pod or from a pod, they literally just write basically an empty network policy. They don't write.
well, the difference is you can say egress and don't provide anything down there. That by definition means block everything. But if you provide the rule, egress rule, which says I wanted to select namespace selector empty curly places, that means a different thing. That's my understanding on the network policy, current network policy.
Yeah, we're not talking about having no egress rules. We're talking about having an egress rule that explicitly contains namespace selector empty, which is different from nil, right?
Right.
So
No, totally. I got you.
it looks to me like network policy, or sorry, like OVN Kubernetes does implement it correctly.
Okay, cool. So maybe that is a valid. I was just saying like basically, if this is the case, then that kind of removes one of our reasons to even bring this back up again, because CNI is already doing it if they're implementing the API correctly. But otherwise, I don't have any other thoughts, and I totally get it if no one else here does. Dan's already gave a comment. The only thing I would advocate for doing now is adding an IP block selector maybe for egress traffic if we wanted to do this, and see what the feedback is. I don't think we should add we should add a IP block selector for ingress and egress traffic. That's for sure. But
if we add IP block, I would say do not add except, just let people mix allow and deny rules, because the except semantics in network policy IP block are really annoying.
Yeah, and they're hard to implement, at least for OBS. Are there any other thoughts here? I mean, it's totally all right for a thought to be, we don't want to deal with it now, but we are going to have to deal with it eventually. So our rationale was we might as well revisit it, because I'd say the number of voices in this has dwindled down to now us 3 or 4. So it's a lot easier to get agreement on things than it was. Okay, I'm gonna let this soak a little bit more. I would like to get Tim's opinion. I think the summary of our opinion is up to date here. If it's not, please add a further comment, like Dan did. Okay, is there anything else folks would like to talk about now? Comments, questions, concerns?
I think not really related to now policy API SIG, I guess. But I was just wondering, I haven't been able to, tag along with the multi-cluster SIG discussions. I'm just wondering, is there anything related to the multi-cluster policy that has been brought up there? Do you have any idea on that or no?
I've been going to the meetings. Nothing's been brought up yet. I
Interesting.
know Sanjeev put together a POC of sort of a really basic multi-cluster network policy
Right.
setup.
I've been looking at these documents, but I do feel like as of now, it's more written in a way like functional specs rather than user stories.
Yeah.
So I'm just really curious on, how people think they needed to use, multi-cluster policies. But
Right. And as that matures, hopefully that conversation will keep moving. Like I said, it hasn't really yet. I will
Okay.
definitely let this group know, because I go to those meetings. They've actually been getting canceled a lot recently because of empty agendas. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, not much has been going on in the last couple weeks at least.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. And then so after, I'll kind of go back and make some updates based on what we did today. Sorry, I didn't do it until today for last time's meeting just because I was super busy with some other stuff. But I'll try to get that done sooner rather than later. Rahul, just you weren't here yet, but I'm also going to set up a meeting with Tim. He couldn't come today, so he has free time on Friday. I'm going to set up another meeting so we can hopefully kind of squash some of these final little things out, such as basically just syntactical refactoring of AMP ports, and also talk about north-south stuff. So I'll add you to that meeting if you're interested as well.
Yes, please. Thank you.
And hopefully after that, if we can come out of those two with A+1 from Dan and Tim, I'd feel really good. So those are my next steps for now. Sound good? Cool. Awesome. Well, I'll give everyone 20 minutes back. Thanks so much for coming, per usual. And yeah, I hope you all have a good week. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye.
Yep.
See ya, bye, folks.